All right, well, welcome back into the podcast. Want to remind everybody right now to make sure if you're watching on YouTube to subscribe to the YouTube page. It really helps me out. It's real simple. Just click that subscribe button. That way you get all the content when it drops. It helps your boy out. Really, really appreciate it. Full disclosure on what's going on here this evening. I'm taping this. It's about 9:15 on Wednesday night, September 15th. And full disclosure, I had a guest lined up. A big guest, completely lined up, and it fell through kind of at the last minute. So I'm kind of having to pull a last-minute audible at the line here and go to a solo podcast. And it's really been a while since I've dialed up a solo pod. It's been over a month, been guest-heavy for the past month with the launching of this YouTube page and Nebraska football season. So you know what? I'm kind of fired up. Little therapy session. This time it's taped. So it's me, it's you, and of course, it's going to be a lot of Husker football because it's a big, big week for Nebraska with heading to, obviously, Oklahoma. Heisman candidate at quarterback and Spencer Rattler. You got a top 5 team in the country. It's the 50th anniversary of the game of the century, Nebraska, Oklahoma. It's a big week. So, on this podcast here, I'm going to give you guys my official prediction for the game. I got some keys and some thoughts as I've just been nonstop thinking about it, like I'm sure a lot of you have as well. But I want to start with this. I want to start with just the rivalry itself, because it's been really, really fun throughout this week. Whether you're reading Tom Chattel, Mitch Sherman, whoever, Dirk Chatlin's been writing some good stuff as well. Really, everybody in the Nebraska media contingent has done an incredible job of really illustrating what this rivalry is all about with Nebraska and Oklahoma. And for me, so I was born in 1984, 37 years old, and I never really knew the Oklahoma rivalry. By the time I was kind of old enough to understand what I was watching, digest football, Oklahoma wasn't really Oklahoma that you had heard about, right? And Nebraska was at its peak, right, coming into the 90s. And the reality is, though, you listen to people talk about it, whether it's my dad, people, other boss, whether it was my grandpa, whether it's, my uncles, different people talking about it, talking to the Rudes about the rivalry. You read up on it. You go back and you watch the old games on YouTube, and you just quickly learn that this isn't just talk, right? Like sometimes, let's be honest, you hear things that were going on back in the day, air quotes there. And, it can kind of be like, man, okay, has this gotten embellished over time? No. There's one thing that has not gotten embellished over time. It's the amazingness of the Nebraska-Oklahoma rivalry. I mean, you talk to anybody, that was kind of college football for the better part of, 2-3 decades, right? And it's just interesting, though, because for me, Colorado was the big rival growing up. Like, that was the game. It became the Black Friday game. That was the one that it felt like there was a lot of animosity and hatred between the two fan bases. I mean, there's infamous stories you hear about people having to change license plates as they get into the Colorado border, because if you park your car in Boulder, Colorado with Nebraska license plates, well, your car's gonna get vandalized pretty good. So Colorado was the rival I grew up on. But all it takes is just a shred of asking around, talking to people, studying up on it, and you find out quickly what this Oklahoma rivalry is all about. And as far as the games that I remember, or the ones that I've gone back and watched that have really stood out to me, there are 3 really, really big ones for me. The first one is the 2001 Nebraska-Oklahoma game. Number 1 versus number 2. In Lincoln Memorial Stadium. I was at the game, west balcony, with my brother. Just an incredible game. Let me tell you, it actually was. It was kind of a slugfest back and forth. It was kind of a defensive grinder. Oklahoma had their quarterbacks get knocked out of the game. Eric Crouch was really kept in check for the majority of that game. So it was one of those games. It wasn't necessarily a great game. It had a great finish. Really, it had a great play. Of course, talking about the stunts to Crouch Black 41 flash reverse pass. I mean, I was in the west balcony. I could just see it develop perfectly, right? Like I could totally see when it was stunts, when he was pulling up, I could see Crouch kind of running down the Nebraska sideline. It was incredible. It's probably my favorite Nebraska football game I've ever attended. And it's one of my 5 to 10 greatest sports memories of my life was that game, and in particular, that play. And, going back and watching this game, doing my Husker Classic recap podcast that I do with former Husker Bo Rude, my best friend, it was really fun to go back and watch this game. I urge everybody to go listen to that Husker Classic recap. I tweeted it out earlier this week, so make sure you guys go check that out. It's just the thing that stands out about that game, beyond just the fact that, like I told you, it was kind of a defensive grinder of a game. It bears repeating that Oklahoma tried the exact same trick play earlier in the game. A little jet sweep reverse pass to the quarterback, and their trick play didn't work, and it was wide open. It was the quarterback got knocked down by the Nebraska defensive end, which kind of threw off the timing of the play. The pass was short. The quarterback slipped trying to catch the ball, but it was wide open. He was going to walk into the end zone. So Oklahoma dials up the exact same trick play. It doesn't work. Nebraska dials it up, and it works. It's just kind of amazing to think that as these two coaching staffs are preparing for this game and feeling like they got to have something funky in terms of a trick play or something different, they both come up with the same thing. They both run it. One works, one doesn't. And, stunts to Crouch has to be the loudest Memorial Stadium moment I've ever been a part of. It's one of the 3, I always talk about this, maybe I'm going to do a whole podcast on this. To me, it's one of the 3 most iconic plays in Nebraska football history, and it was Eric Crouch's Heisman moment. I mean, pretty much when Crouch caught that ball and ran into the end zone, they might as well just had the Heisman Trophy waiting for him and handed it to him. It was his at that point. So certainly that game stands out when I think about this rivalry. The other game that stands out to me is the 1978 Nebraska-Oklahoma game. I did this game as well for the Husker Classic Recap podcast. I also tweeted this one out, so make sure you go check this one out. I chose this game when figuring out which old games to go watch because this was Tom Osborne's first win against Oklahoma. Really think about this now. So, he takes over, and he had lost his first 5 games against the Sooners. And it was weighing on Tom Osborne. It was weighing on the fan base. It was weighing on the program. And it was amazing to go back and rewatch the game because of one of the graphics they showed. So they show Tom Osborne on the sideline. Just he's got his headset on. They show him. And the graphic underneath just reads, Tom Osborne hasn't beaten Oklahoma. that was it. But that just illustrates just the nature of the situation where it's like, forget everything else. The only thing that matters from a Nebraska perspective is this new coach who took over for Bob Devaney has not beaten Oklahoma. Period. End of story. Like, that's the hook on this game. That's it from a Nebraska standpoint. And so, to me, this game and the way it played out and the fact that Nebraska was able to win was huge for Tom Osborne. It was huge for the way the fan base views Coach Osborne because Tom Osborne has talked about this publicly. He talked about it leading up to the game, that kind of the dynamic where it irritated him, just how it was a one game. It kind of become a one game season, right? Where like it didn't matter what you did throughout the year. If you lost to Oklahoma, season was a waste in the eyes of the fans. And it was like, no matter what, hasn't beaten Oklahoma. So, this game was huge for Tom Osborne in that regard. And, you looked at Oklahoma in that game. They were ranked number 1 in the country. They had Billy Sims at running back who won the Heisman Trophy. And it was a cold November afternoon in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's cold. And the game kind of mirrored the elements of the game. It was a physical fist fight, bar fight, bloodbath. Dudes were hitting, guys were dropping like flies. I mean, it was really physical both ways. In fact, Oklahoma fumbled 9 times in the game, and Nebraska recovered 6 of them, including Billy Sims fumbles at the 2-yard line going in to probably win the game, fumbles at the 2-yard line, and Jim Pillen recovers it, and then Nebraska is able to kind of run out the clock. But that's kind of how the game ends for Oklahoma, where they have their they have their 9th fumble of the day, and Nebraska recovers 6 of them. But it's just an amazing play where, once again, I'm on this iconic play thing. This game, 78 Nebraska Oklahoma, featured another iconic play, which is probably in the top 10 most iconic Husker plays, and that's the hit from John Rood. If you haven't seen it, which I don't know if you're obviously not a Nebraska fan or you've been living under a rock. I mean, it's John Rood on a kickoff, comes screaming down. Somehow he slips through 2 blockers. He's untouched. I'm talking full head of steam. And listen, I know John Rood because of my relationship with the Roods. John Rood's a big dude. And the one thing that dude will do is he'll knock your head off. And that's exactly what he did here. He just comes through like a missile. It's probably the hardest hit I've ever seen in a college football game. He shattered the Oklahoma returner's collarbone. And what's interesting about this play, beyond just the amazing, sheer physical, raw nature of the hit, was that Oklahoma fumbles the football. But the ref, it's clear as day. I mean, he shattered his collarbone. Clear as day, he fumbles the football, but the ref called him down. And Tom Osborne, Mr. Stoic, Mr. Calm, Mr. Never Freak Out, lost his mind relative to what you usually see with Tom Osborne. It's by far the most animated I've ever seen him on the sidelines, arguing with the officials, angry at the call that they didn't give, that they called him down and it wasn't a fumble, because it was obvious it was a terrible missed call. But I think it goes to show you just how big this game was. The fact that here's Mr. Stoic. He wants to beat Oklahoma so bad. Huge play. It doesn't go his way. He thinks, well, this was the break that was going to seal it for Nebraska. It doesn't happen. And so he's losing his mind. But a big, it's one of my favorite games, man. It's a big game for Tom Osborne, big win for Tom Osborne. And legend has it, talk to some people, that Nebraska partied, and its players, everybody partied and celebrated so hard after that win that it threw them off the game, and they turned around, because they were undefeated at that point. They turn around and they lose to Missouri the next week. So that's the legend has it was such a big win that they lost their mind celebrating, and they turn around and lose to Missouri the next weekend. But I mean, it's a huge win for Tom Osborne, first win over Oklahoma. Next game in terms of this Nebraska-Oklahoma rivalry we got to talk about is obviously the game of the century. It's what we're celebrating this weekend with Nebraska and OU. It's probably it's the biggest game in Husker history. It's probably arguably one of the biggest, if not the biggest game in college football history. And looking up some stuff on this game, just chew on some of this stuff here. So with the game of the century, Nebraska-Oklahoma, number 1 versus number 2. There was an estimated 55 million people watching this game. 55 million was the largest TV audience ever for a college football game at the time. And to put this into context, I think in the last 20 years, probably the biggest national title game was probably USC Texas, Reggie Bush, Leinart, Vince Young, right? Like, that's probably the biggest game. That game, USC Texas, had 35 million. Last year, Bama Ohio State had 18 million. This had 55 million people watching this game. Nebraska had the number 1 defense in the country. Oklahoma had the number 1 offense, and Oklahoma had an NCAA record in terms of rushing yards per game. The Sooners that year averaged 472 yards rushing per game. It's ridiculous. They lined up in the wishbone, and they were good. The teams, Nebraska, Oklahoma, I love this stat. They combined for 17 of the 22 all-conference selections. I mean, at what point when you're making those all-conference selections, you'd be like, do we need to give like Missouri a guy? We need to, how many Oklahoma? We're up 17. We got I mean, you get spread because I know I've done things where I got to pick all conference stuff. You feel like, okay, we can't put another guy on the team with this, but it just goes to show you how good these two teams were that they had no choice. Think about that. 17 of the 22 all-conference selections were from these two teams. That's unbelievable. Then the other little nugget I found, this was on Wikipedia, and you got to believe everything you read on Wikipedia, right? Apparently, Bob Devaney, he had food flown in from Lincoln, Nebraska to the hotel in Norman because he was so worried about maybe bookies or different people getting to the hotel, the kitchen, the cooking staff, that there would maybe be some food poisoning for the Nebraska football team. So he had food flown from Lincoln. Just goes to show you how crazy the times were with that. I mean, Nebraska had studs everywhere, and Johnny Rodgers, Rich Glover, Larry Jacobson, Willie Harper, Jerry Taggy, Jeff Kinney, and it's amazing. You know, I watched this game for the first time recently, and I tell you what, it lived up to the hype for me. I mean, here, game of the century, all this different stuff, and you kind of like it sets a bar in your mind, like, okay, how is this really going to live up to it? And it did. I mean, it was back and forth. It was intense. You could feel it. I got a kick out of Jerry Taggy, and in particular Jeff Kinney's jersey by the end of the game. I don't know how they were making these jerseys. It was just shredded. It was almost like a Rottweiler had gotten Jeff Kinney's jersey and just ripped it to pieces. I mean, he basically didn't have a front of the jersey. Is just, but those are the images, like the old helmets, like one bar across. It was just like it was a man's game. It was a grown ass football game. And Jeff Kinney was tough. Johnny Rodgers, you know, so explosive, so fast. Jerry Taggy was a gamer. Rich Glover and Larry Jacobson were incredible in the interior. And, you know, it culminates with Nebraska being down 31-28 with 7 minutes left. They have a game-winning 74-yard drive where Jeff Kinney punches it in. Nebraska's offense stepped up in the second half. Once again, you know, the fumble bug bit Oklahoma. They fumbled it 3 times in the game, which was huge. But back to the iconic play thing, this game obviously produces the most iconic play in Nebraska football history in Johnny Rodgers' 72-yard punt return. And it produces probably the most iconic play-by-play call from Lyle Brimser of, you know, man, woman, and child that put him in the aisle. Like, I mean, just an incredible, perfect call for what you saw from Johnny the Jet on that punt return. By the way, again, this is a 37-year-old guy just, you know, talking like, that was the first score of the game, that punt return. For some reason in my mind, I thought that was later in the game. I thought that was later in the game, like a crucial moment in the game where Nebraska, like it was the play that blew it open for Nebraska or whatever. I mean, I'm willing to be honest with you guys. And I thought that play happened later in the game. This is the first score of the game, 72-yard punt return. Kind of set the tone for the game, though. I'm like, these 55 million people that sat down to watch were like, oh my God, are we about to watch a hell of a football game? But just an iconic game, iconic play from Johnny Rodgers, probably the most iconic punt return in college football history, certainly the most iconic play in Nebraska football history. And it was probably one of the most important and biggest college football games ever. So, I mean, that's why we're celebrating it here this weekend with 50th anniversary of it. Then the last one I wrote down, I won't spend too much time breaking this one down, but it was the reason I'll elaborate here. I wrote down the 2010 Big 12 championship game, Nebraska, Oklahoma. It was the last time these two teams met. It was Nebraska's last game in the Big 12. It was a frustrating game from a Nebraska standpoint. If you remember, Nebraska got up 17-0 and blew it. They turned the ball over 4 times. And Oklahoma was able to kind of roar back. They went 23-20, and that was it. It was the last 2 times again. Last time these two teams had played. It was the last time these two teams were in the same conference. And what's interesting was when you think of that point. So first week of December 2010. Just how from that point on, these two programs, Oklahoma and Nebraska, they went in different directions, literally and figuratively. Nebraska joins a different conference, and Oklahoma goes on to have a very successful decade of football, multiple conference championships. They, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, they get a run of quarterbacks. It's incredible. They pass the baton from Bob Stoops to Lincoln Riley in a successful manner. And then Nebraska, we all know what's happened there, right? You fire Bo Pelini, hire Mike Riley, fire Mike Riley. You hire Sean Eichhorst, fire Sean Eichhorst. You bring in you bring in Bill Moose, and Bill Moose suddenly retires at the end of the season. Now you bring in Frost. You have a whole bunch of different. Now Trev Alberts is the AD. You had multiple ADs, multiple head coaches, and not a lot of winning. And what's interesting is when you think about that moment, both those Teams in 2010 for that Big 12 championship game, both the teams felt like they were even. They felt like they were right there, neck and neck. And then from that game on, both programs went in totally different directions. And so it's just interesting to kind of contrast where these programs have been since they've last played, which all leads us into this game on Saturday. So again, if you're like me, you just can't stop thinking about this game. It doesn't matter if I am taking my daughter to kindergarten, if I am changing my 1-year-old's diaper, if I'm on a bike ride, if I'm doing the dishes, like I'm constantly thinking about this game. And over the last handful of days, as I've continued to think about this game, there's a couple things that have kind of stood out. Number one, like I get that Oklahoma's known for their potent, high-flying offense, right? Like that's Lincoln Riley, Spencer Rattler, like that's what Oklahoma's become and what they're known for. They got a Heisman candidate at quarterback. So you would think that all the concerns would go to the defensive side of the ball. Defense. But for me, that's not where my mind has gone as I've thought about this game. Because for me, the biggest concern, and there's a lot of them, right? But the biggest concern isn't on defense for me. Now, that isn't to say I think that Nebraska's defense is going to go to Norman, Oklahoma and just stonewall the Sooners. Like, I don't think they're going to go like lock down Oklahoma or anything like that. Not saying that. But for me, when I've thought about this game, the biggest concern is on the other side of the ball. And mainly just a simple question, and it sounds very elementary, but can Nebraska score enough points? Like, can they score enough points? Because to beat Oklahoma, you're going to have to score. There's some teams you play, they're not as potent offensively. You could win a grinder, right? You could see how the game could become a 17-13, 20-13, 14-10 kind of a game. This isn't one of those games. You know what Oklahoma does. You know what they're going to probably do, and that's score. So you being Nebraska in this situation, whoever's playing them, like you're going to need to score. And when I think about this game, like you're probably going to need 30 to at least 30 points, probably 35 points to even have a chance to win this game. And let's be real. Nebraska didn't get 30 points against Illinois. They didn't get 30 points against Buffalo. Now, I get it. They had multiple touchdowns called back, but listen, the final score, 28 points. Nebraska hasn't really shown anything that makes me think they can go get 30 to 35 points against Oklahoma. Like in some ways, we could just stop right there. That's it. Like, don't have to outthink yourself. But that's where my concerns keep going to is like, and we'll get inside all these things here in a second, but like, can Nebraska score enough points? So far through 3 games and really even the last, the 2019 and 2020 seasons, I'm not very confident in the answer to that question. But that leads me into another important component to this game and another key. Sticking with the offense, which is, can Nebraska get their banged up offensive weapons healthy? You could make a case the MVP of this week in terms of who needs to have a great week. It's the trainers. Like, can Nebraska, can they get Oliver Martin, Austin Allen, Omar Manning, Xavier Betts, Travis Vokalek back for this game? Or at least 2 or 3 of those guys back for this game? Because Nebraska is going to need all hands on deck offensively for this one. Because again, when you're playing Oklahoma, you're going to have to score. You're going to have to put points on the board. And the reality is, like, I don't care who you are. If you're down 5 of your top 7 to 10 weapons on offense, unless you're, Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, where your backups are like 4 and 5-star dudes, your backups are like NFL guys. Unless you're them, your offensive output is going to suffer. Like, if you're down that many guys, you're going to have a hard time clicking on all cylinders and moving the ball at a high clip. You just are. So Nebraska needs to hopefully get a few of those guys back. Most notably, if I could wave my magic Bob Devaney wand on, to get these guys healthy, I would think you'd need Oliver Martin and Austin Allen back. If you can get those two guys back, that's fantastic. Obviously, if you can get Betts and Manning and Vokalek back as well, because Vokalek, by all accounts, is one of the best blocking tight ends, in the conference and specifically on the Nebraska football team. So that's certainly going to be huge as well. Going to have to score. The big question looms, can Nebraska get enough points? Well, a big part of that is getting at least whatever offensive weapons you have healthy and on the field. Sticking with the offense, I'm interested in the play calling. And there's a lot to unpack within that term and with this topic here, because the first thing that stands out, and Bo Root and I talked about this on the recap pod a couple of days ago, I'm curious to see if will Nebraska do something unique or do something different in this game. Does Nebraska slow the game down? Should they try to chew the play clock? Do they try to shorten the amount of limit the amount of possessions in this game? Like, are they going to slow down, snap the ball with 5-10 seconds on the play clock every single time? And I get what's hard about that is that's not what they do. But, say it out loud. Do you really want to go get in a track meet with Oklahoma at Oklahoma? I mean, probably not. So what does Frost do? Right? Like, do you do something completely different, slow the game down? Do you do something completely different, slow it down? Because to me, just trying to go toe-to-toe with Oklahoma seems like a recipe to get blown out. Like, it does. Now, here's the thing. It's easier said than done. It's easy to say, just slow down. I mean, the hard part about that is you always got to be you. And because being you is playing to your strengths, because that's what you preach, that's what you teach, that's what you work on every single day in spring, summer, fall camp, like that. You still got to be you. But what if you plays right into the superior team's hands? Like, can you still be you, but kind of just a different version of you? I don't know. I mean, that's a predicament to me. And I'm really, really curious to see what that looks like. And the other thing with the play calling, if you go watch, which I have a couple of times now, if you go watch the Tulane-Oklahoma game, first game of the season for Oklahoma, one of the things that stands out, because Tulane was right there, lost 40-35, had the ball driving, got stuffed on fourth down at midfield, touchdown would have won the game at Oklahoma. When you watch that game, one of the things that stands out is, man, the play calling for Tulane was big time. Creative, unique, perfectly timed shots. I mean, they had dudes walking into the end zone with some of the creativity. That was jumped out at me. I was like, damn, these plays are awesome. And, Scott Frost, that's supposed to be his thing, right? Like, he was billed as this offensive savant, unbelievable play caller. I mean, he called plays for Oregon where they were running everybody off the field, hanging 50 on everybody. Like, that's supposed to be his thing. And, I mean, I get oftentimes your X's and O's are only as good as your Jimmys and Joes. Like, you can dial up the greatest thing in the world, but if you don't have, the right guy on the wheel route, the right guy in the skinny post, the right guy in the, for the tunnel screen, it might not look as good. But nevertheless, Tulane ran some great, great stuff. So I'll be curious to see what Scott Frost has up his sleeve from just a play calling standpoint. And if anything up that sleeve of his is a trick play or two. Because Eric Crouch, I had Eric Crouch on my podcast in September of 2019, so a couple years ago now. And he told a great story on my podcast because, of course, I had to ask him about Black 41 flash versus pass, the 2001 Nebraska Oklahoma game. And he told me a story how on the Monday of that game week, so they're starting their game prep install, all that stuff. On the Monday of game week, Frank Solich has a team meeting. And Frank Solich showed the entire team a highlight package of all the trick plays in this rivalry, Nebraska and Oklahoma, that have played a vital role both ways. Where one of the through lines with this rivalry has kind of been trickery. We all know what happened that week. Oklahoma tried to run a reverse pass. They missed it. Nebraska ran the Black 41 flash reverse pass, hit it. So they both had trick plays on the mind. So I wonder if Scott Frost has some sort of trick play up his sleeve. Because the one thing that Frost hasn't done a ton of is trick plays. I was really trying to think about it. I mean, Luke McCaffrey on a little like jet sweep pass to J.D. Spielman against Iowa in 2019. That's like, when I try and think of trick plays since Frost has been here, hasn't been a lot of them. There really has not been a lot of them. So I just wonder if, what does the play calling look like? Does it have any trickery to it? Because, man, you watch that Tulane game, it wasn't necessarily trickery, but, man, they dialed up some good stuff. Dialed up some great stuff. Another key for me is, this is fairly simplistic, but the start of the game. You got to get off to a good start. This team is still pretty mentally fragile. I get it. Oklahoma's one of those teams that can give up leads. They did that in the Tulane game where Tulane was able to come back. But you also got to have the ability to put up points to come back. And again, I don't think Nebraska's a team that's built to rally from 21, 24 points against a good team. I just don't think they are. And so, like we've said, again, I think there's the psyche of this team is a little fragile. You got to find a way to hang in there early. Make a few good tone-setting plays early in the game, get everyone's confidence up, and get your nerves down right away. Try to get off to a good start. It's huge in this one. And then, obviously, I mean, just there are the obvious ones of special teams, turnovers, and penalties, right? I mean, Nebraska's been poor in all three categories really for the last handful of years, and the first three games have kind of been no different. You want to be the top 5 team on the road. They need a flipping of the script in all three of those areas. Which leads me to kind of an official prediction. The spread, at least, as of middle of the week, sitting about 22 points as we're taping this. Oklahoma's favored by 22. So what's going to happen? Listen, I think Oklahoma's going to win this game. Let's not belabor the point here and get crazy. Like, I haven't heard one person pick Nebraska to win this game. In fact, as I'm consuming, whether it's, writers, social media, radio shows, whatever, like, I really haven't heard anyone think that Nebraska is going to keep it close. And the hard part is close is a subjective word. Like, how do you define close? Is close covering the 22-point spread? Is close being within a touchdown late, 3 points late? Like, it's a subjective term. I think Nebraska can hang in there and keep it close. Close meaning like within 14 points, 13, 14 points. But man, their margin for error is really, really, really thin. Because if Nebraska goes to Norman and does what it's done with bad special teams, muffed punts, missing field goals, bad punting, turnovers, back-breaking penalties in really bad spots. If they do that, Oklahoma's going to cover the 22 points. You can get away with those things against Illinois and hang in there. They did. You can get away with those things against Fordham and Buffalo and win, which is what they did. You cannot do that against Oklahoma. You just can't. So listen, everything I've talked about for the past half hour, like we can talk about a bunch of stuff like trick plays and getting off to a good start and getting guys healthy and all this stuff. But if Nebraska goes out and loses special teams, the turnover battle, and has more penalties, it's over, right? Like they're likely going to get rolled. So we'll see what happens in those areas. And like I said earlier, I think, we'll see what Nebraska's offense can do. I'm concerned about their ability to put up enough points in this game. What's hard is like oftentimes your confidence level in an offense is a reflection of how you feel about the quarterback. Like if you feel good about the quarterback, you usually feel decent about the offense. Typically speaking, when you're assessing football. Completely not true for Nebraska. I feel really good about Adrian Martinez. I think he's had arguably his two best games he's had since his freshman year. He looks explosive. He's moving well. He's throwing the ball well. He's made some unbelievable scramble plays. I feel really good about Martinez right now. He's not the concern, right? The concern is he going to get any help around him offensively? Like, can Nebraska run the ball with the running backs at all? Can this O-line get any push at all? Because if we're writing down just big picture concerns for this team through 3 games, I'd put the O-line at number 1 to me. Number 1. And so what's going to happen with the rushing attack? What is going to happen with his weapons at wide receiver? We talked about everybody that's been hurt. All those things are legitimate questions. Because what's crazy is, and again, I might eat my words really bad on this. I actually think the defense is equipped to hang in there a little bit. Again, I'm not saying, Bahe thinks the rest of the defense is going to go hold him to 3 points. No, I'm not saying that at all. I don't think, I think you can't do that to Oklahoma. No one does that to Oklahoma. But I feel good about where the defense is at right now. Like, I feel good about the linebackers, how they're playing. I think Oklahoma could have a hard time running the football. They're really banged up at their running back spot. Nebraska, this is a little thing, but it's something I know that certain football coaches think is important. Nebraska's used to playing spread teams, right? Because they see it every day in practice. I think, as opposed to teams that go under center, use a fullback, huddle up, and run it right down your throat like Iowa and Wisconsin. I think those teams make people really, really nervous. Or by people, I mean the coaching staff really nervous because they don't practice against that every day. They go against a version of Oklahoma every day. Now, you don't have Oklahoma's athletes out there, but they go against a version of it. So it's not completely foreign. But I think Nebraska's defense can hang in there. But one of the things that pops when you watch Oklahoma play, and you've obviously been watching Nebraska play, is there is a dramatic difference in the overall team speed with the Sooners and the Huskers. Like, one of the biggest advantages I think Oklahoma has is speed on both sides of the ball, in particular on offense. Nebraska is not a very fast team. Oklahoma is fast. And that may reveal itself in a major way because, the weapons that OU has at wide receiver combined with Spencer Rattler's ability to throw, it's a bitch, man. It is tough to deal with. And we'll see if Nebraska can come with some sort of pass rush. We'll see if Nebraska's secondary can step up to the challenge. But to me, as long as the offense doesn't put the defense in terrible spots, and as long as special teams doesn't put the defense just in terrible spots, I think the defense can hang in there and not get lit up like some people are expecting. Now, if the offense is turning the ball over, going 3 and out for 3 straight possessions, and special teams is awful and giving the ball at the doorstep for Oklahoma, yeah, well then forget about it, right? But as long as Nebraska's offense and special teams cannot put the defense just in awful spots, I think the defense can hang in there. But to me, there are 2 things to watch within the defense inside of all that. Number 1 is missed tackles. Oklahoma is one of those teams where, they get you spread out and you got to be able to tackle in space. And Nebraska can't allow any leaky yardage with missed tackles. And they don't let a 5-yard gain become a 25-yard gain because you missed a tackle. Don't let a 10-yard gain become a 40-yard gain. Don't let a 10-yard gain become a touchdown because you missed a tackle. You got to be in those one-on-one spots. You have to bring your guy down. And along those lines, thinking about one-on-one, can Nebraska's defensive backs win some one-on-one situations? Like deep ball down the sideline. It's Cam Taylor-Britt one-on-one with Marvin Mims, Oklahoma's top wide receiver. Can Cam Taylor-Britt win that battle? Can Nebraska's secondary win those battles more often than not over the course of 4 quarters? Because Rattler's got confidence. He's kind of a gunslinger. Like, he'll throw it into double coverage. He's got supreme confidence in his wide receivers, rightfully so. He'll throw it even if a guy's covered. Can Nebraska win, their defensive backs win those one-on-one situations? Those are two things. Missed tackles, allowing 10-yard gains to become 50-yarders or 10-yarders to become 25-yarders. And then one-on-one situations with the defensive backs for Nebraska against Oklahoma's wide receivers. Listen, it wouldn't shock me if Nebraska got popped and Oklahoma covered the spread. I don't know how that could really surprise anyone, right? But it also wouldn't surprise me if Nebraska hung around and played Oklahoma relatively tough. Like, you got a 4-year talented starting quarterback in Adrian Martinez who's playing some great football right now. And you got an experienced veteran junior and senior laden defense who's playing their best football collectively right now. Like, you check those two boxes, you would think you can go kind of hang in there against just about anybody within reason. But Nebraska has enough issues that it's hard to be super confident in them in this spot. So, listen, what happens? I think Nebraska's defense hangs in there, but eventually Nebraska's shortcomings on offense and in the turnover department and special teams, those things are eventually going to kind of rear their ugly head, and Oklahoma's going to eventually pull away. I don't think this is going to be a blowout, but I think Oklahoma wins 41-24, 40-21, 40-24, somewhere kind of in that area. That's how I see it. And I'm fascinated to see how this game unfolds. I mean, so it's a big spot for Nebraska. And the last thing I'll say is I hate to play the moral victory card. I hate that. But it's only, the game's going to be kicked off on September 18th. Not even into October yet. Like, this team's got a lot of football left to play this season. So one of the interesting things about this weekend to me, can Nebraska find a way to go play well enough and perform well enough that you leave Norman, Oklahoma with some semblance of confidence, with your confidence intact, where you're ready to go to battle and go to East Lansing the following weekend and take on the Spartans and start your Big Ten slate? I know you played Illinois, but really start your Big Ten slate in ours. Because what you can't have happen is complete and total collapse, and a team that's obviously trying to find that collective confidence just go get curb stomped on the road. We've seen sometimes you put too much into one game, it doesn't go well, you fall apart. Happened in 2007 with Nebraska and USC. You could argue, even though Nebraska won the following weekend, it happened with game day in 2019 with Nebraska and Ohio State. Ohio State came here, blew the doors off Nebraska, and kind of was never the same. You could even argue that in 2016, Mike Riley's second year, they were 7-0. They won a close game on the road at Wisconsin. Lost in overtime at Wisconsin. So they're 7-1 going to Columbus, Ohio. They go to Ohio State and lose 62-3. They lost so bad that I think it took all the wind out of their sails. And they sputter and struggle down the stretch, and we all know what ends up happening the following season. So whether it's early in the season, late in the season, whatever, you have to find a way if you're Nebraska this weekend to do enough good things, perform well enough to where you leave with some semblance of confidence and feeling decent about yourself, getting ready to go play the rest of the season. Because a lot of people have pointed to this next Michigan State game on September 25th as, the real season begins for Nebraska against Michigan State. So, I mean, the bottom line is Nebraska can lose this Oklahoma game and still have a successful season. I mean, no one, when you're doing the whole win, loss, nobody has picked Nebraska to win this game. Everybody assumed this is going to be a loss. So Nebraska can lose this game and still have a good season, a successful season, a season in which you see progress from Scott Frost in year 4. But in order to me to have a successful season, you got to find a way to go play well, even if you lose the game, and walk off the field feeling decent about yourself. I can't wait, man. It should be fascinating. It should be fun to celebrate this rivalry. It should be fun to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the game of the century. Should be a really, really cool scene in Norman, Oklahoma. The game's on Big Fox. Gus Johnson, Joel Klatt, Janie Taft going to be on the call. Big Noon Kickoff's going to be there. The crew. It's going to be great, man. It's going to be great. Reminder, Bo Root and I will have the official game recap pod for Nebraska, Oklahoma for you guys on Sunday. We'll sit down, we'll analyze, we'll discuss this game in its entirety. So be ready for that. Listen to it on the pod. You can watch it on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to both the podcast and the YouTube page. Appreciate everybody downloading and supporting the podcast. Appreciate you listening. We'll catch you next time on the Nick Bahe Podcast.